My God. What would you do if you were in love with someone who was half human, half fish, a soul that belonged to the ocean, and one day the person you loved might disappear, carried away by the call of the sea? Ayana, the little girl once saved from the arms of a mermaid, understood that the waves were not merely sound, but a voice calling out. That call grew louder as she entered her teenage years. Ayana was different. She carried within her eyes, as deep as the midnight sea, skin that shimmered faintly with golden light under the moon, and strange dreams about a city beneath the ocean. The villagers both cherished her and held her in suspicion. To them, Ayana was a blessing, but she might also be an omen. In the midst of doubtful gazes, only one person dared to stand close to her, Kojo, a young man whose smile was as warm as the rising Sunday. Affection blossomed between the two, yet it was overshadowed by fear. Fear of the village's judgment, fear of the secrets still hidden by the ocean, fear that one day Ayana would abandon everything to return to the place where she truly belonged. If it were you, would you dare to choose such a love? Is it strong enough to hold on to a girl standing between two worlds? Have you ever felt like you were standing in the middle of a crowd, yet in everyone's eyes, you were nothing but an outcast? That was Ayana, the girl raised with love, by Wame and Mama Zola, in an ancient African-American village, yet the older she grew, the more her differences shone through like a streak of light that could not be hidden. Ayana's childhood was not without laughter, but it was unusual in ways few could understand. In the games on the sandy shore, when the children cheered and shouted, Ayana often froze, tilting her head to listen. To them, it was nothing but the murmur of waves. To her, it was strange melodies, like a song whispered solely for her ears. And strangely enough, when the other children ran about breathlessly, Ayana would pause, let out a quiet laugh, as though she had just heard a tiny secret no one else knew. Many of her peers would whisper then, "There's something not like us about that girl." As she grew older, her differences were no longer just in her ears. Whenever dark clouds rolled in over the sea, Ayana's body trembled like a string tightened by the wind. Before the storm struck, she would murmur, "The storm is coming." At first, the adults only chuckled, dismissing it as a child's wild guess. But when her words repeated, again and again, frighteningly accurate, their smiles turned into unreadable looks, half gratitude, half fear. Ayana never tried to appear different. She only wanted to play like the other children, to laugh when the group laughed, to cry when someone fell. Yet every time she spoke of an approaching storm, the villagers would rush to secure boats, pull in nets, shut doors, and when the tempest truly arrived, they looked at her with unusual eyes. Those were the eyes of people who had just been saved, but also of people who had just witnessed something they could not find peace with. Some could not hide their gratitude. "The girl carries the blessing of the sea," they said, gripping Ayana's hands tightly as if to hold on to good fortune. But others whispered in the dark, "A child who knows too much of storms, can she still be human like us?" Ayana heard it all. She neither cried nor argued. But at night, in her small hut, she quietly gazed at the moonlight cast upon her skin, a faint golden glow like fish scales beneath the water. She asked herself, could they be right? Do I truly not belong here? Fortunately, in those days filled with whispers, Ayana was not alone. Wayne, the strict yet loving foster father, always believed that difference was not a burden but a gift. He often joked, half serious, half playful, "If you know when the storm will come, at least I won't have to spend all night watching the skies like the other old fishermen." His words made her laugh, even if her heart was not entirely lightened. Mama Zola, the woman who had lost her own child, treated Ayana as the very breath that kept her alive. She never flinched at the strange glow in the girl's eyes. All she cared about was whether Ayana ate enough meals, slept enough hours, and laughed enough times. Whenever the villagers gossiped, Mama simply pulled Ayana into her arms and whispered, "You are my gift." And a gift is never something to be feared. But even the love of those two could not erase the growing distance in the villagers' eyes. People find it easy to love a small child, yet they become wary of a young girl who grows with inexplicable signs. The older Ayana became, the more suspicion followed. They did not speak it outright, but she felt it. The polite smiles, the indifferent nods, and above all, the invisible gap each time she walked into the fish market or the village square all weighed heavily on her heart. At times, Ayana comforted herself by thinking that at least her differences had helped. She had saved the village from sudden storms, helped the fishermen avoid losses, but then that thought became a paradox. For if she was truly useful, why did some still look at her as though she were a stranger? She remembered once, after correctly predicting a great storm, a man approached her and placed a fresh mackerel in her hands. He smiled, but the smile was so strained that Ayana only wanted to run away. Behind that smile was not trust, but wariness, as if he were offering tribute to some shapeless force just to seek protection. Ayana understood that love and fear often walked together, and sometimes they blurred so much that even those involved could not tell them apart. But for a teenage girl, that burden was too heavy. Each time she heard the waves, Ayana no longer knew whether it was the sea's lullaby or a reminder that she would forever be different. And yet, amid all these contradictions, there were still ordinary moments that made Ayana laugh. Like when Wame grew frustrated because termites had eaten through an oar, or when Mama Zola forgot the pot of fish stew boiling furiously as she rushed outside to watch the children playing tag. Such small details preserved for Ayana a faint sense of normalcy, making her believe she still belonged here, at least within her small family. However, the villagers' suspicion only grew stronger. Each time Ayana warned of impending danger, safety returned hand in hand with a haunting question. Who is this girl really? And this marked the beginning of Ayana's journey, whether her difference was the sea's blessing or a sign of a destiny too fearful to be named. All right, my dear audience, let us pause here. I am delighted if you find this story intriguing. Please comment number 1 if you would like to continue listening. And don't forget to subscribe. I would be truly glad to have your companionship from wherever you are in the world. They did not speak it outright, but she felt it. The polite smiles, the indifferent nods, and above all, the invisible gap each time she walked into the fish market or the village square all weighed heavily on her heart. At times, Ayana comforted herself by thinking that at least her differences had helped. She had saved the village from sudden storms, helped the fishermen avoid losses. But then, that thought became a paradox. For if she was truly useful, why did some still look at her as though she were a stranger? She remembered once, after correctly predicting a great storm, a man approached her and placed a fresh mackerel in her hands. He smiled, but the smile was so strained that Ayana only wanted to run away. Behind that smile was not trust, but wariness, as if he were offering tribute to some shapeless force just to seek protection. Ayana understood that love and fear often walked together, and sometimes they blurred so much that even those involved could not tell them apart. But for a teenage girl, that burden was too heavy. Each time she heard the waves, Ayana no longer knew whether it was the sea's lullaby or a reminder that she would forever be different. And yet, amid all these contradictions, there were still ordinary moments that made Ayana laugh. Like when Wame grew frustrated because termites had eaten through an oar, or when Mama Zola forgot the pot of fish stew boiling furiously as she rushed outside to watch the children playing tag. Such small details preserved for Ayana a faint sense of normalcy, making her believe she still belonged here, at least within her small family. However, the villagers' suspicion only grew stronger. Each time Ayana warned of impending danger, safety returned hand in hand with a haunting question. Who is this girl really? And this marked the beginning of Ayana's journey, whether her difference was the sea's blessing or a sign of a destiny too fearful to be named. All right, my dear audience, let us pause here. I am delighted if you find this story intriguing. Please comment number 1 if you would like to continue listening. And don't forget to subscribe. I would be truly glad to have your companionship from wherever you are in the world. Loving someone is already difficult, but loving someone whom the entire village sees as otherworldly is like walking a thin, fragile rope stretched across 2 deep chasms. Kojo understood this better than anyone. And Ayana, with a heart both yearning and fearful, stood at the very center of endless whispers. Every afternoon, when the sun sank into the sea like a blazing shard of gold and red, 2 small figures appeared once more on the sandy shore. They sat together, needing few words. Kojo was often silent, but his eyes betrayed the growing affection within him. To him, Ayana was not a child of the waves, not a mysterious gift left by the sea, but simply a girl with a gentle heart, sometimes as sorrowful as twilight, sometimes as radiant as the morning Sunday. Yet, that stillness was never truly peaceful. Behind the sound of crashing waves were murmurs that stung like salt. A mortal boy, daring to love the daughter of the waves? Words like thorns wove their way into every gap between them. Ayana heard them, and so did Kojo. Neither responded, but both knew that their hearts were weighed down by the judgment of a community long accustomed to fearing what it could not understand. Ayana often turned away, her gaze fixed on the sea, as if seeking refuge in the waves that might swallow all those judgments. Kojo, by contrast, never stopped watching her. He wanted to reach out, to say he cared nothing for the whispers, but feared that too much strength might wound her even more. So, he chose silence, letting his steadiness speak in place of words. The villagers bore no malice, yet fear easily hardened into prejudice. They knew Ayana had saved them from sudden storms, knew she could hear the secret voices of the sea. But the more they understood, the more they believed she did not belong to them. To them, Ayana was both blessing and curse, at once a paradox that made anyone close to her a thorn in the village's eye. Kojo became that thorn. Friends began to drift away, familiar jokes faded. The adults in the village looked at him with eyes of regret and warning. They did not need to speak, for Kojo understood the meaning behind their gaze. Don't bring trouble upon yourself. He only smiled, sometimes consoling himself that at least he had a reason to sit by the sea each evening without being called idle. But deep inside, Kojo knew that smile could not erase the growing isolation tightening around him. Ayana saw it all. She knew her presence was costing Kojo dearly. It made her both happy and pained. Happy because someone dared to stand beside her, pained because she was uncertain if that love could withstand an entire village. Whenever she heard the whispers, Ayana wished she could be just an ordinary girl so that Kojo would not have to bear being shunned merely for loving her. But such wishes, like sea foam, appeared only to vanish at once. On long nights, when the village was deep in sleep, Ayana often sat outside the porch, listening to the tiny shells rattling softly in the wind. She would ask herself, if one day the sea calls me away, will Kojo still sit upon this crimson shore? That fear pressed upon her heart, yet it also made each moment with Kojo more precious than ever. Kojo, in his own silence, carried the same fear. He knew he could resist people's words, but how could he resist the sea itself? How could he hold on to a girl whose very blood the waves demanded back? Each time Ayana fell quiet, staring into the distance, Kojo felt as though she had already taken half a step away from the land, and that thought rocked his heart like a small boat in a hidden undertow. Even so, they still sat side by side each evening. They needed no explanations, no promises. It was that silence itself that became the most enduring flame, keeping them from dissolving in the current of judgment. Love, sometimes, does not need declarations. It only needs patience to remain. The whole village watched, none daring to speak aloud, but their eyes were enough for Ayana and Kojo to understand. This love would never be easily accepted. It could become a miracle bridging two worlds, or the spark that ignited a tragedy. Would such a fragile love have the strength to resist the call of the sea and the judgment of an entire community? Do you believe that sometimes dreams are not just fragments of imagination, but echoes from another world? For Ayana, the night was not a quiet time for rest, but the beginning of mysterious songs that slipped into her mind. At first, it was only the waves stretching long like a distant lullaby. But gradually, they became distinct melodies. At times gentle like an embracing arm, at times fierce like a storm tearing the sky apart. In those dreams, Ayana saw women with hair flowing like seaweed, golden scales shimmering like moonlight dissolving into the waves. They sat beside underground rivers, singing while calling her sister. Sometimes, she found herself drifting through radiant coral cities, dazzling palaces beneath the sea, all like a hidden paradise. Yet when she awoke, her heart always ached, as though half her soul was being pulled taut, longing to return to a place she had never truly belonged. Day followed night, and Ayana's inner struggle grew sharper. By day, she was still the girl walking beside Kojo, sitting with Mama Zola, smiling when Wame revealed his clumsy attempts at cooking. But by night, dreams swallowed her whole, reminding her she did not belong solely to the land. Ayana's heart was like a drifting boat, anchored on one side by love and family, and on the other pulled toward the deep sea by an invisible thread. Wame noticed the change. Each time he saw his daughter restless under the moonlight, his chest tightened. He knew the truth could not be hidden forever, yet he dreaded the moment when she might call the sea her home. The worry showed on his weathered face, his eyes shadowed by the grief of a father who had lost too much. Wame wanted to believe that his love for Ayana was strong enough to hold her, but deep inside he knew there were calls no one could silence. In the village, whispers about Ayana spread wider. People noticed that whenever she appeared on the shore, schools of fish suddenly crowded toward the coast. When the wind shifted, she often knew beforehand, and fishermen who heeded her avoided dangerous waves. This both earned their gratitude and seeded unease. For in many minds, strange gifts always came with a price. Kojo saw Ayana growing quieter, and it tore at him. He knew she was hiding storms within, yet he did not know how to step into that world. Sometimes, he joked to make her laugh, like when he pretended to mimic the sound of waves by shaking a coconut shell in his hand, and indeed, Ayana laughed. But behind that laughter was a faraway look, like a sail set toward an unknown horizon. Ayana's fear came not only from dreams, but from her own body's reactions. Each time a storm approached, she no longer merely trembled. She heard songs rising in her blood, blending with her heartbeat, urging her to step into the water. Many times, she stopped right at the edge of the waves, her body taut, her legs yearning to leap out to sea. Only when Kojo suddenly called her name did she startle, retreating into his trembling embrace. Mama Zola noticed too. She loved Ayana as her own daughter, but the girl's changes filled her with dread. Some nights, she sat by Ayana's bed, listening to her whisper in dreams in a language no one understood. Each word sounded like a song mingled with the sea's voice, making Zola's skin prickle. She gripped the girl's hand tightly, as if to pull her back to reality, but deep down she knew love could not tame everything. The Caribbean fishing village was long familiar with myths, and when Ayana was mentioned, people began to use heavier words. Daughter of the sea, the chosen one. Some believed she would bring prosperous harvests. Others feared her presence would awaken forces buried in the abyss. Either way, Ayana was no longer just a normal girl in their eyes. She became a symbol, but also an excuse for fear. In that whirlpool, Ayana found her only peace with Kojo and her small family. Yet even there, her heart was no longer completely at ease. The mysterious singing continued, clearer and stronger each day. At times, she closed her eyes, imagining herself gliding through water, a shimmering tail replacing her legs. Each dream made her feel closer to her true self, yet pained her as well, knowing she was drifting farther from those she loved. Kojo, in his quiet moments, wondered, was his love strong enough to keep Ayana here, or was he merely a temporary stop before she returned to the deep sea? That question was never spoken, but it lingered in every glance, every touch of the hand, and Wame, night after night, sat on the porch gazing out at the dark sea. He knew the time would come when Ayana had to face the truth. The only thing he could do was pray that, when that moment arrived, she would be strong enough not to choose just one world, but both. Would Ayana find balance between the call of the sea and the love on land, or would destiny force her to choose one side? There are fateful moments that need no warning. They come unexpectedly, like an undercurrent wave, capable of sweeping away an entire life in a single breath. That night, Ayana reached such a moment. Amid the growing chorus of whispers, she and Kojo still quietly sought each other. Moonlight washed the crimson shore in silver, and in that stillness, Kojo suddenly took her hand. His palm was warm, steady, like an anchor amidst chaos. He didn't say much, only whispered softly, "No matter what the village says, to me you are still Ayana. That's all." Those simple words echoed inside her like the drums of a sacred ritual. Ayana's cheeks flushed, a smile curved upon her lips, but deep in her heart, the weight of fear remained. She dreaded the day when the call of the deep sea might steal away everything her tender love, her family, and the home she had fought so hard to keep. In the small hut, the ancient seashell, the last gift of the mermaid, trembled faintly beneath the mat, casting a soft golden glow like a lantern. Each time Ayana and Kojo were near, it shone brighter, as though foretelling that this love would lead her to the crossroads of fate. Wame had seen it many times, and he understood the day Ayana must face the truth was closer than ever. The next morning, the Caribbean village bustled in preparation for the first fishing trip of the season. Boats were pushed into the sea, voices shouted with joy. But Ayana, standing at a distance, suddenly heard an unusual song. Not the gentle lullabies she often heard, but an urgent rhythm, a warning. Her heart clenched, her whole body tensed. Looking toward the horizon, she saw thin streaks of dark clouds lurking like phantoms. She rushed to warn the villagers. "A storm is coming, turn back." But this time, no one listened. They had grown too accustomed to her predictions, and some had grown weary of her presence. Someone even muttered loud enough for her to hear, always warning of storms, just frightening the village. The mocking laughter choked her words. She could do nothing but watch the small boats sail into the vast sea. By midday, the wind suddenly shifted. In the distance, towering waterspouts rose, waves charging like tens of thousands of white horses toward the shore. The storm came suddenly, fiercer than anyone imagined. Boats were tossed violently, villagers panicked as they rowed for land, cries for help echoed across the sea. Ayana collapsed to her knees, clutching her head. The voices of the sea now roared in her blood, no longer lullabies but commands. Save them. Become who you are. Fear seized her heart, yet when she saw a boat filled with children about to be swallowed by the waves, Ayana plunged into the water. The moment her body touched the sea, a golden light erupted around her. Her black hair spread in the water, her eyes widened, seeing every current as if it were pulsing veins. Instead of being pulled under, Ayana felt herself merging with the ocean as though she was its very heartbeat. She reached out her hand, and the waves receded. A single gesture, yet enough to open a path for the boat. On the shore, the villagers stood frozen, eyes wide as the sea parted on both sides, guided by an unseen force. The boat was saved, drifting safely back to land. But the image of Ayana standing amidst the waves, her body glowing, left them speechless. Kojo rushed forward to catch her as Ayana collapsed from exhaustion. His heart was torn between terror and awe. He knew then she was no longer just an ordinary girl. As for the villagers, their voices rose in chaos. Some fell to their knees, calling her the messenger of the sea, while others recoiled in horror. She is not human. The once divided village now fractured more deeply than ever. Wame stood motionless, watching his daughter in Kojo's arms. He knew his worst fear had come true. Ayana's power could no longer be hidden. And once revealed, fate would never allow him to keep her bound by a father's love. Half-conscious, Ayana still heard the sea's song. But this time, instead of urging, it whispered, "You have begun. There is no turning back." She trembled, clutching Kojo's hand tightly, clinging to the last warmth of the land. So now, the question remained, was this fragile young love strong enough to keep Ayana tethered, or would the mysterious power within her push her ever farther from the village? There are moments when truth no longer hides in whispered rumors but is laid bare before everyone's eyes. On the night of the fiercest storm in years, the truth about Ayana was revealed. The sea rose in towering walls of water, so high they blotted out the moonlight. The wind howled, ripping thatched roofs from homes, tossing small boats into the air like meaningless toys. The entire village was swallowed in chaos. Amid cries for help, several boats were swept far out, tilting on the edge of a black, gaping vortex. Families screamed, helplessly watching their loved ones vanish into the storm. Ayana ran toward the shore without a second thought. In that moment, the ocean's call surged in her blood, stronger than any fear. She raised her voice not in human speech, but in a resounding song that fused with the rhythm of the waves. A miracle unfolded. The raging waves froze, then subsided, opening a radiant path that guided the boats back to safety. The entire village stood in stunned silence. Light surrounded Ayana, her skin shimmering gold like scales beneath the rain, her eyes glowing like twin stars awakened in the darkness. In that instant, she was no longer the orphan they had raised, but the very embodiment of the sea. The boats reached shore. Survivors collapsed, clutching the land, trembling and weeping with relief. Yet amid gratitude, fear rekindled. Whispers pierced like knives. She is not entirely human. Ayana heard it all. Her body trembled. Her legs gave way upon the soaked sand. Tears mingled with rain, streaking down her luminous face. Kojo rushed to her side, holding her close, shielding her from the villagers' astonished and fearful stares. But the truth was undeniable. Ayana could no longer conceal the other half of herself. The next morning, the village was no longer the same. Some lit incense, kneeling before Wame's hut, calling Ayana the messenger of the sea, begging her to continue protecting them. Others kept their distance, eyes clouded with fear, whispering, "If she is that powerful, who can guarantee she won't one day unleash her wrath and drown us all?" Faith and fear, those two extremes, tore apart the village once united as family. Wame sat in silence inside the hut, watching the ancient seashell tremble faintly, its golden light flickering like a heart struggling to beat. He knew the moment he could no longer avoid had arrived. He had once promised to raise Ayana with love, not fear. Yet now, the truth of her existence itself sowed fear into the villagers' hearts. As a father, he only wanted to keep his daughter. But he also understood the sea was growing ever more determined to reclaim what belonged to it. Mama Zola cradled Ayana, whispering warm words. "You are not a curse. You are a gift." But Ayana only lowered her head, eyes brimming with tears. The whispers outside weighed heavier than any wave. Kojo's love, Zola's embrace, Wame's protection, would they be enough to hold her when the entire community looked upon her with half reverence, half dread? During those days, Kojo became the only wall she could lean on. He defied the village's stares, walking hand in hand with her through the crowd, as if declaring, "I am not afraid." But Ayana knew difference was not so easily erased. She had saved the village, yet at the same time had confirmed in their minds that she belonged to another world. When night fell, Ayana sat alone by the shore. The waves lapped gently, but in her ears, the song of the sea grew louder, echoing. It was no longer a whisper, but a clear command: return, your true home awaits. She clutched her chest, her heart pounding fiercely. She knew the choice was near a choice that could cost her everything. Would Ayana choose to stay with love and family, or let go and return to the sea, the place she truly belonged? There are nights when the sea is not just the sea. It becomes a vast mirror reflecting the turmoil within the human heart. On the night after that fateful storm, Ayana sat on the wet sand, and for the first time she truly felt herself torn in two. The small fishing village, once united like a family, was now split into halves. One half called her name in gratitude, believing Ayana's presence to be a blessing. The other half trembled in fear, whispering that calamity had only just begun. Between these waves of emotion, Ayana felt like a stone battered by the surf, with no place to anchor. Wayne walked heavily through the village, his heart bleeding within him. He longed to hold his daughter close, to keep her, but the truth unfolding before his eyes could not be denied. He knew the blood of the sea had awakened in her, and one day it would tear her from his arms. Mama Zola tried to soothe her with warm words, but the unease in her eyes spoke louder than comfort ever could. And Kojo, the bold young man who once laughed like morning sunlight, now trembled at the thought of losing the girl he loved. But unlike the villagers, he did not fear her. He feared the sea. Feared that the abyss would reclaim Ayana as if collecting a debt. That night, Ayana sat alone on the shore. The wind lashed cold against her skin. The waves pounded like enormous heartbeats. From the depths came the song again. No longer a distant melody, but a voice so near it felt like invisible hands reaching out, opening a path for her return. In her mind, Ayana saw shimmering coral palaces, eyes that called her sister, flowing hair that seemed to have waited for her across countless lifetimes. And yet behind her, another gaze held her back. The gaze of Kojo, trembling but filled with love. That gaze carried no magic, no glittering scales, only the sincerity of a heart afraid, yet still daring to love. Ayana's heart swayed, as though one side was destiny, the other freedom of choice. She burst into tears, crying out to the sea winds, "Who am I? Where do I belong?" Her voice shattered into the night, carried away by the waves. And in that moment, a whisper rose from the depths. "You do not need to choose one side. You are the bridge." Those words thundered within Ayana like a storm. The bridge, not half of one thing, not torn apart, but a union. She was not born to choose between land or sea, but to connect the two. Yet, being the bridge also meant bearing the storms from both sides. When Ayana turned back, the villagers had gathered behind her. Their eyes shone with every emotion, fear, reverence, curiosity, anger, all fixed upon her. Wame stood at the edge, his hand trembling, as if he wanted to rush forward to protect his daughter, but knew he no longer had the strength to shield her. Mama Zola bowed her head and wept, while Kojo stepped forward, only to falter as whispers rippled, "Drive her away." Ayana met their eyes directly. Her heart trembled, but for the first time she did not step back. The voice of the sea still hummed in her mind, filling her with an uncanny calm. Tears remained on her cheeks, but her eyes blazed, bearing the depth of the sea and the steadiness of the land. Silence fell. The entire village held its breath, as though awaiting a judgment. But Ayana said nothing. She simply raised her hand, letting raindrops fall into her open palm. In that instant, the sea behind her stilled, its roar quieted. A seabird swooped low, landing near her feet before lifting into the sky. A small sign, yet it felt like a miracle. The villagers glanced at one another in confusion. Ayana understood this was not yet the time to declare anything. The road ahead remained shrouded, but within her, for the first time, a clear light appeared. She was not a soul torn apart. She was the place where two worlds met. Would the villagers have the courage to accept Ayana as a bridge, or would fear drive them to destroy the very thing that might save them? At dawn, the Caribbean sky unfolded in a pale pink, as though no storm had ever passed. But within the village, the echoes of that fateful night had not yet settled. People whispered, some raised their eyes to Ayana with gratitude, others still shifted uneasily with doubt. And in that very moment, Ayana understood that silence would only deepen the fracture. It was time for her to stand and speak the truth. On the crimson shore, where so many secrets had once been buried, Ayana gathered the villagers. The waves still lapped, the wind still blew, yet the air hung heavy like a tribunal awaiting judgment. She stepped into the circle, her heart trembling but her gaze unflinching. In that instant, she was no longer the lost child she had once been, but a young woman who carried both the sea and the land within her. Her voice quivered at first, yet each word fell with conviction. She admitted the blood of the sea flowed within her. She no longer hid, no longer turned away. The dreams of coral cities, the songs from the deep, the light that burst forth during the storm, all of it was true. But then Ayana drew a deep breath and declared she would not choose to leave. She chose to stay, not to deny the sea, but to connect two worlds. Difference is not a curse, she said, her voice now resonant like the surf. It is a gift, teaching us how to unite. A moment of silence blanketed the shore. The wind stilled, even the waves seemed to soften, as if nature itself was listening. Then Mama Zola stepped forward from the crowd, her eyes blurred with tears. She wrapped Ayana in her arms, like a true mother welcoming back a lost child. Kojo, his face still marked with the rain of the previous night, clasped her hand tightly. His eyes burned not only with love, but with absolute faith. A few elder fishermen dropped to their knees, tears streaming, trembling with gratitude that their children lived because Ayana had shielded them. But not all was easy. There were still wary glances, hesitant sighs, and yet, within that tide of emotion, for the first time, gratitude outweighed fear. Difference was no longer an ending, but the beginning of a new belief. From afar, Wame stood with his hand trembling against his face. He had lived a lifetime, fearing the day he would lose his daughter. But in that moment, tears poured forth not of fear, but of pride. His voice cracked in the wind as he whispered, "You are no longer my burden. You are my pride." From that day on, Ayana was no longer merely the orphan the village had raised. She became a symbol, the bridge between land and sea. When storms gathered, the villagers looked to her as their lighthouse. When the waters calmed, they spoke her name in lullabies to their children, a testament that difference was not a threat, but a strength. Her love with Kojo no longer needed to hide in the shadows of suspicion. Though trials still lay ahead, that love burned bright, like a flame that endured amidst the storm. It was more than the affection of two souls, it was proof that the heart could cross boundaries reason dared not. And deep within, Ayana knew her journey had only begun. The sea still called, its songs still rose each night. But now, she no longer heard them as commands to divide. She heard them as the harmony of her own being, half daughter of the waves, half daughter of the land. Perhaps what makes Ayana's story touch our hearts is not merely the miracles or the mysterious power of the sea. The deepest truth lies in the journey of a girl who was different, who dared to face the doubtful eyes of others, and who ultimately discovered difference is not a chain but a gift. In the real world, how many people have been seen as not like us because of the color of their skin, their origins, or the dreams they chose to pursue? But Ayana showed us that true strength is not in choosing one side, but in having the courage to stand between two worlds and unite them. It is love, compassion, and faith that transform loneliness into a bridge so others can see the light within what they once feared. And yet, this story is not over. The sea still calls Ayana's name each night, and a bridge, no matter how strong, will always face the test of storms. When both worlds demand her, will Ayana be strong enough to hold to her choice? Will her young love with Kojo withstand the trials when the secrets of the deep still lie hidden? Dear audience, that will be the journey of the next chapter. But before stepping into it, remember this: every difference within you is exactly what this world needs. If this story has touched your heart, leave a comment, share it with your family and friends in the United States to join in listening to these African folktales, and tell me, if it were you, would you choose the land or the sea? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss Part 3, where the ocean's deepest secrets will finally be revealed.